Good morning. Welcome to Legacy IAS Academy. In this video, we will discuss the issue of data deficit in education. Here we have a statement given by Nelson Mandela. Education is the most important weapon or most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Such kind of quotes can be used in your essay in order to enhance the quality of your writing. Okay, you can start your essay with such kind of quotes, or in the middle, when you find this quote is relevant, such kind of quotes can be used. Okay, then what is the context in which that we are discussing this particular issue? This is discussed in the context of upcoming budget 2022 and 23 budget, and also the challenges faced due to the COVID-19 pandemic. What is the issue as of now? The issue is of the data mismatch. Okay, we have different kinds of data. We have different data catering to the single sector, that is education. First thing is the World Bank data. What does the World Bank data say? It says India spends almost 14% of its budget on education. Okay, this is a very important data. Remember this. World Bank says India spends almost 14% of its budget on education. Economic survey of 2020 and 21. Economic survey of 2020 and 21 says India spent almost 2.8% of its GDP, 2.8% of its GDP in 2018 and 2019 on education. Okay, this is the second type of data we have. The third data is by the Ministry of Education, which says India spent almost 4% of its GDP, 4% of its GDP on education. Can you see here? There are three different kinds of data. One is by the World Bank, second is by the Economic Survey, third is by the Ministry of Education. Why? Why do you think that there are three different kinds of data on the single sector, on the same sector? That is because this data by the Ministry of Education will also involve the expenditure done by the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment on education. This is the first one. Second thing, it will also include the ministry expenditure by the Ministry of Tribals. Expenditure by the Ministry of Tribals on education. Okay, but the Economic Survey data, which says 2.8% of GDP is spent on education in the year 2018 and 19, will not include these two. Will not include these two. Understood? This is the reason why we have three different kinds of data pertaining to the sector of education. Now let's see the expenditure on education. First thing, the Hong Kong spends almost $1,32,000 on education per annum. Imagine the amount, $1,32,000 on education. But look at UAE, which is spending almost $1 lakh on education. But where is India? India lies here, which is spending almost 18,900, that is almost pertaining to $19,000 on education per annum. This is far less when compared to all developed and developing countries. Okay, this is very less. India needs to ramp up its expenditure on education. But what is the role of private schools? Okay, let's discuss the role of private schools in the education sector in India. Here there is a growth of private schools from 1978 to 2017. You can see the growth, how the private schools saw its tremendous growth in previous decades. In 1978, out of 100, there were just 3.4 government private schools. In 1998, it grew to 9.2, and in 2017, we have almost 35 private schools for every for every 100 government school. And there's also an issue of commercialization of education. This growth of private schools led to the commercialization of education. Here you see there are 10.9 lakh government schools that caters to 13 crore students. Okay, 10.9 lakh government schools cater to 13 crore students, but 4.6 lakh private schools caters to almost 12 crore. Almost 12 crore. Can you see the problem here? There are higher number of government schools when compared to private schools, but these two cater to almost same number of students. This is the issue of capacity in the government schools. Most of the government schools have single teacher. Do you know the meaning of single teacher government schools? Single teacher is when there are almost 5 to 6 students from class 1 to 5, or less than 10 students from class 1 to 5, and all these classes and all subjects are handled by a single teacher, one teacher. Compare this with urban private schools, which has a very great infrastructure, which has very good faculties, and what can you expect from these private schools and government schools when they are compared? You can easily think the quality of students that are coming out. Okay. Next, let's discuss the impact of COVID-19 on the education sector as a whole. Okay, the first impact was the shift towards online mode of teaching. This also led to the closure of government schools because government schools could not adopt the new methods of teaching as it was done by the private education systems. Because of that, we had the problem of accessibility. Okay, we had the problem of accessibility because 14% of the rural households had access to internet. At the same time, 43% of the urban households had access to internet. Because of this, in urban areas, private schools could easily adopt the online mode of education. At the same time, in rural areas, government schools could not adopt, and it led to the closure of government schools. It's been almost 2 years now, and the government schools are not functioning up to their potential. This has led to the reduced quality of teaching and we will also discuss here basic numeracy and learning. It is very bad as of now. And the third issue is because of the inclusivity. We also discussed here the issue of data divide. We also call it as rural urban divide, or we also call it as digital divide. There is a digital divide when it comes to the rural and urban areas. Because of that, we had the issue of inclusivity. See, this particular points can also be used while writing the answers on GS3. Okay, there's an issue of inclusive growth in your GS3. Okay, there's a topic called inclusive growth. When you're writing answers on inclusive growth, this particular data of rural urban divide and lack of can be used. This particular data can be used. Okay, let's discuss what is the state of government schools in India. See, in this picture you can see that students do not have a particular seating arrangement to sit. They sit on floor from morning till evening, and you can see the age-old methods of using the blackboard, and there is no mention of digital or ICT, what we call as ICT. There is no option for internet-based teaching methods. This apart, we also have the problem of infrastructure in government educational institutions. 40,000 government schools do not have access to toilets, and almost 18,000 have no access to pure drinking water. Okay, this is a very important data. When you have to substantiate your statement that there is a problem of infrastructure in government owned schools, you can use this particular data to prove your point. See, there's also, as we have discussed, lack of computers and infrastructure in most of the government schools. So what should we do? What are the right steps in this direction so that India can reap the benefits of its demographic dividend? The first thing that India needs to do, or it is doing, is by implementing new education policy. I here advise you to have a brief knowledge about new education policy, and you can use this provision in various answers that you write in your mains examination. So India aims to have gross enrollment ratio of 50% through new education policy. Okay, I would also request you to comment on what is the GER, gross enrollment ratio now. Okay, can you please comment what is the gross enrollment ratio now that India is aiming to make it 50% in couple of years. The second thing is the education cess. Education cess that is collected has to be spent judiciously, and it should be based on the output, not just that the government is spending, it should also measure the output. Third one is the importance to all-round development, not only marks. Okay, marks are important, but along with that, vocational education, skill development, and the value system, the value education has to be a part of academics in order to ensure all-round development of students. And also the Kothari committee recommendations has to be implemented. What does the Kothari committee says? We have something called as school complex. We already discussed about the single teacher government schools. Kothari committee says that if you take, these are the primary education schools in various villages. Okay, this has somewhere around 10 students or 15 students here, or somewhere around 20 students here. These are of very limited capacity. We just have 1 or 2 teachers. These are primary schools, and at a block level we need to have a higher or a secondary education institution which caters to all these villages. In other words, these primary educational institutions should act as a feeder to this secondary institution, should act as a feeder. Remember this term. This is what Kothari committee recommendations are all about. It talks about school complex. This is the school complex. This whole system is called a school complex. This has to be implemented. If this is implemented, then the quality of education is taken care of. Infrastructure issues are taken care of. Most of the government problems in education, government education system is taken care of if the Kothari committee recommendations are implemented. And the next is, we have the problem of data collection and processing. We discussed about the data of World Bank, okay, the data of Economic Survey, and also the data of Ministry of Education. Okay, we discussed about the data deficit or the data mismatch. These discrepancies in different data has to be bridged, and we need to have a proper data, and this data has to be processed in order to extract the relevant information from this data which can be used in policy making. So in the next thing, in higher education, what we need to do is we need to adopt public-private partnership in higher education. This will solve the issue of infrastructure, and also it will solve the issue of human development. Okay, when private public partnership is implemented, it solves the issue of higher education in India. The next thing that we need to do is to bridge the gap between academics and the industry. According to various reports, it is said that just 50% of engineers who pass out every year are employable without training. Okay, 4 years of engineering. After this, only 50% of engineers are employable without training. This has to be increased. This is because we have a gap between academics and the industrial requirement. This has to be bridged. Okay, now let's see the mains question and try answering it. Okay, analyze the impact of colonial education policy on India and comment on the need and challenges related to the education system in India. This particular question can be asked in your mains, and this can be divided into two parts. Okay, in every question when you're writing, try dividing the question into number of blocks so that it will be easy for you to answer and to make sure that you answer to the point. Okay, first part is the impact of colonial education policy on India. Okay, in order to answer this part of the question, you would start from Macaulay Committee, 1934. You would also discuss Wood's Dispatch, 1954, 1854, sorry, and you will also talk about downward infiltration theory and what was its impact, and you will also talk about Rayleigh Committee recommendations. You will also talk about 1904 Universities Act. Okay, you will also talk about Sadler Committee. You write all these committees and its recommendations and their impact on Indians. Okay, and the second part, comment on the need and challenges related to the education system in India. We discussed this part, the challenges that are facing the Indian education, like primary education. You are writing the challenges, divide it into challenges for primary education, okay, challenges for higher education. You have different kind of challenges. List down the challenges. Okay, list down the challenges. At the end your answer with a conclusion. Conclusion can also be like, in order to reap the benefits of demographic dividend, India needs to bridge its gap. India needs to bridge the gaps in the sector of education. Okay, this is how you can end your answer. For more such content, please subscribe to Legacy IAS Academy. Thank you.